everyone. Yeah, I think a lot of you, we've spoken at, this is the third SaaS meetup, so a lot of familiar faces and obviously some new as well. So just thanks everybody for coming down, and obviously to Neve for hosting today's event. Really appreciate Startup Dublin, who are tonight's sponsors, and making the pizza and beer and this happen. So that's great. Yeah, Neve said, in her intro, I organised the SaaS meetups. This is the third one in Dublin. It's probably the 8th in total. We'll have a little summer holiday now and come back, towards the end of the year. And in September as well, we've got SaaS Doc, which is happening in Dublin as well. And as Neve said, because one of the reasons anyway is because it's big, such a big SaaS hub here, and companies like Slack and New Relic and HubSpot, and Dropbox are choosing Dublin as their EMEA HQ. So that made it quite an easy decision sort of ish for SaaS Doc to kind of be here as well. There must be something in the water for that to happen. But yeah, tonight as I say, third SaaS meetup. We do a different theme sort of every time, and what I wanted to do, for this one is, I've been saying it, to guys like Mike for ages. Slack's so hot right now. We always say, I just, love that Slack product, and just really wanted to, let's talk about Slack, baby. Sorry, I had to.
That's all right.
Just thought of that.
It was sassy.
Just thought of that just right now. But yeah, so we got James from Slack. I'll let James, introduce himself, and we're going to talk sales and marketing and Slack, because I guess all of you are interested in probably all three of those things. So without further ado, James, who are you?
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah.
I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. This is pretty special to have you all come out and spend time, especially on a Sunday night like tonight. So thank you very much. I'm originally from Canada, so I might talk about ice hockey or something like that. I make a drink in our office called the Canadiano. It's got maple syrup. If you ever come by, I'll make you one. I started with Slack in June 2013, and if you know sort of the larger story of Slack, you'll realize that June 2013 was not a time when Slack was hiring, and it had previously gone through sort of an iteration of as a company called TinySpec that had built a massively multiplayer online game called Glitch that didn't sort of prove the kind of returns that it needed to. And so they built a team of about 50 people, laid off everybody except for 8, and so there was a core group of 8 that sort of decided to pivot and move into building out a product from the internal messaging system that they'd built. I was the 9th person to join the team, and to give you an idea of like what that meant, it meant everything from, so there were 3 of us in the Vancouver office, Stuart, myself, and a front-end engineer named Johnny Rogers, and it meant that like days were, what's the like 3-year, 5-year positioning plan for the communication space and enterprises? Okay, what's the email we're going to write to invite people to try the product? So it was like a huge range of tasks that we had to do at the beginning particularly. And one of the main tasks that I was doing was working with customers, helping them understand Slack, what it did for them, how it fit into their communication framework, because everybody was kind of in this situation where they used email for this and Skype for this and now WhatsApp for this, and they had sort of this cobbled together system of all these different things, and nothing kind of pulled it together into one place, made it available on all their devices, made it searchable, and made it make sense. And so that was kind of the discovery part of what we now call account management. So it's really just working with our customers to help them understand Slack, what it can do for them, and then getting through some of the hurdles around that, whether it's legal, security, compliance, all that kind of stuff, as you work into larger and larger companies that become part of what you have to do to make customers successful.
Okay, thanks, Jake. And I mean, should we take a seat? Can everybody see us if we're sitting down? I think it's kind of tall enough. I think you can see our heads. So we know now who you are. Today we're talking about sales and marketing. I guess is the kind of the essence of what we want to cover, and how you guys do it, because you seem to be doing an okay job, But before we get into that, just a couple of questions. So you guys came to Dublin last year, towards the end of last year, was it? Or
yeah, we opened the Dublin office May 3rd, 2015.
Okay.
And so there were a couple of us on the founding team, and then we hired a team pretty quickly, and now we're about, I think, 35, almost 40 people And we've moved from our original offices, which were in the Digital Exchange as part of the Digital Hub in one of the great sort of Guinness storehouses that they've converted into office space, to now we're on Hatch Street in, I think it's called One Park Place. So we've got space in that building. We've got a floor there for 180 people now. So we're not 180 yet, but we're growing that quickly where you kind of plan that.
A nice local next to your old office with the Guinness storehouse, right? It was one of the reasons that you chose.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I even did the tour.
And why did you guys? I did the tour. I just went straight to the top. But, why did you guys come to Dublin?
I think talent was the number one reason.
Okay.
Amazing sort of local talent of Irish people, but also great talent that had been brought in by sort of predecessor companies that we wanted to be able to work with. So if you needed somebody who was an expert on the German market or the Spanish market, people had already brought those in, whether it was, for different reasons. The second was sort of consistency of narrative. We came over in February of 2015 to sort of scout for a week. And we were really looking at like Amsterdam, London, Dublin. And pretty quickly, we were pretty convinced that it was going to be Amsterdam or Dublin. And we shared a lot of common sort of funders with a number of the companies that we wanted to meet with here. So Squarespace and New Relic, LinkedIn, Facebook, and just consistently meeting with them through the great work of IDA Ireland, who I think does a great service to Dublin and Ireland overall by bringing companies in and kind of, making it super easy to plug into all the things that they need to know, whether that's service providers like legal or recruiters or accounting or anything like that, to everything else. So the consistency of narrative was like, you come here, you open your first office, you get to 30 people, you focus on sales and marketing or sales and customer support. Once you get to 30 people, you move to a second office, you grow to like 120 people, you bring in representative business services from finance, marketing, HR, those kinds of things. You grow to sort of the 120 to like 300, and you start bringing in like local market experts from your main markets. And so just that consistency of the success pattern that we had seen, I think was really influential for us.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about sales and marketing then. Got a few questions prepared on that. Going sort of straight into it. There's, I don't know if it's sort of famously known that Slack doesn't, have a sales team, but it manages to, sell, shed loads of licenses, or what do you call it, users, or what's the correct term?
Upgraded users.
Upgraded users. So, what is Slack? What is the sales model? Between these four walls of. The mic's not on.
The sales model is drive demand through, I think, a lot of consumer tactics. So those tend to be everything like we're running in the US right now, TV ads, for example. On a widespread basis, because the applicability of Slack is super broad. It's not just for technical people, it's not just for lawyers, it's not just for the healthcare industry or something like that. And so you can use tactics that are much more consumer oriented. So that's really on the demand generation side of things. From there, I think you just have to provide kind of like a super simple, compelling message to people when you do drive that first kind of interaction. And then from there, just provide a great sort of consistent, easy to get experience. I mean, one of the things we talk about is like Slack is a terrible single player experience. Like I'm gonna message with whom. So in a way, it's kind of a challenging onboarding process because you don't just have to convince one person, you have to convince at least 3 or 4 people to try the thing. And so for us, social proof and credibility were incredibly important right from the earliest days because some of our first sort of parcel of customers were friends and family customers that people knew. So companies like RDO and Medium, and those were some of the folks who provided us, amazing early feedback on the product. We were really responsive to that and like iterated the product really quickly and just kind of baked it in a way that worked really well for them. But they also worked with us through some of the hiccups. Like there's kind of this internal joke, which is like Slack is the perfect product for the size of the Slack team. Because you never really encounter like the pain points of like a 5,000 person company until you're a 5,000 person company. So we've tried to get much better at that, but it's always a work in progress just because like it's super hard to think of all the different ways that your product doesn't work if you don't get that sort of direct tacit experience.
Okay.
So that was kind of a long-winded way. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. But I'm going to dig into that sort of
Good.
more. So, I mean, so you're doing sales through demand generation and using some, consumer techniques and
Yeah.
But
we're doing like traditional enterprise sales too.
okay. So have you got your team? Do you have SDRs? Sales development representatives,
We don't,
account
no.
executives?
No, we don't. And the reason is we want to try and make decisions around like team function and customer experience, like what's best for the customer, what's best for the team, what's best for individuals. And what we said is like what's best for the customer is like the first time I interact with Slack, I get this person that I work with, and like that is the person that stays with me throughout my whole life. Mm-hmm. So we actually try and adhere to that as much as we can, where that is the person, just because the process of I interact with company X and now I'm like deemed deserving of like a more important person to talk to, and I then work with them and like invest all this time in telling them my story and helping them understand my pain points and like becoming an expertise in my problem, and then they pass me on to somebody else, I think was not the customer experience we were shooting for. We wanted to really provide people with great people to work with who could support them throughout their journey.
Okay, and you kind of, or are, I think, moving into the enterprise and signing up some bigger multinational sort of companies. How do you win these multinational companies? Is it a kind of a bottom up? You've got somebody in, I don't know, a creative department, let's say, who starts using the product and it spreads like wildfire potentially, or have you got account guys that are saying, okay, we want to work with the Irish Times or whatever. How are you winning these sort of big customers and then managing them thereafter?
Yeah. So I think it's probably a two-part question. So how we do it today, and like 77 of the Fortune 100 companies are paying Slack users today. So that'll tell you, but then if you look at like our number of paid users, which is around just over 800,000 now, you'll realize that like they're not wall-to-wall rollouts. So it is very much bottom-up, but there are ways that you can make bottom-up work in more effective ways, I think. But I think I speak to the experience of Slack because Slack is a product that everybody within a knowledge organization will use. And I think in lots of ways we feel like that's an inevitable thing. That the 10-year sort of change, the 20-year sort of change is from email-based communication where, even just in the name of it, it's electronic mail. It's sort of a relic from an earlier analog world to a messaging-based system. And if you think about the types of emails you get 4 kinds of emails, right? You get like messages like we use to coordinate tonight. You get messages with attachments, which are really just moving a file from place to place. You get messages from computers. So like you have a new follower or this expense report needs to be approved or something like that. And you get spam. And I think all of those are better served in a centralized communication system. So email is point to point, it's end to end. So it's like you have an email address and I have an email address, and there's nothing in between really, right? And so in a way it's like being in a dark room and having a torch to find your way. It's kind of useless after a while. Whereas Slack, what we really want to be able to do is turn on the lights. So you've got a central repository that everybody actually joins. And so when you change like that, I think it's a big change. And so you've got to, we often say like many small yeses. And so, you work with a small team, make them successful, build on that to a larger team, build on that to a business unit, build on that to an even larger unit. So that's a long way of saying land and expand is the colloquialism. But do it in a way that I think always is just making it an inevitability that your product then becomes the thing that people use to communicate inside an organization.
Okay, so yeah, answered the question definitely. And how many people are at Slack today? I mean, how big is the company?
450.
450. So I think most people in the room, well, I'm just making an assumption that are smaller than that. Maybe some larger, some majority probably smaller. So when you guys you joined as the 9th person, how did you acquire your first customers then? So now you're doing TV adverts, because you've got a lot of money in the bank, I understand. But when you were 9 people, you probably still had a bit of money. But how did you do it? Was it totally different?
We did some hokey things, and I don't mean hokey like that they were like slimy or anything like that, but just like at one point we had like 5 different landing pages that we bought a bunch of AdWords to like drive, and they all had different like positioning statements on them, and we just saw like which one did people sign up for, and it wasn't even sign up for like to actually try the product. It was to sign up to get an invitation to try the product at that time. So, I mean, we did super like grassroots kind of stuff like that. And that worked reasonably well because there was kind of like nothing else at the time that was similar to the way that we were pitching it. The other thing we did was just ask people we knew to try it. And that was really, I think, probably the best way to do it because it was high bandwidth communications. They would tell you right away if it didn't work or if it sucked or if like, you know, this doesn't make any sense or this is hard or like one grumpy pants on our team won't move to it. And so like the adoption of Slack is kind of binary in a way, in the sense that if everybody's not on it, it just becomes one more thing to check and it sort of withers on the vine. So just understanding like those dynamics of adoption, we just worked really closely with sort of a handful of like, you know, 8 to 12 customers early stage to figure out some of those things and then bake some of those things into the product and trying to figure out like what is the most important thing we can work on. And one of the things that was really helpful for us was like not thinking about like feature lists or like problems in terms of like stack ranked. There's a great kind of apocryphal essay by, I think it's the guy who wrote who built Gmail. No, I'm sorry, it's the guy one of the teams who built like Google Docs, and they did like this user conference at one point, and they said like, okay, well here are the 10 things we could be working on, like rank them 1 to 10, and all the users like ranked them 1 to 10 like they were told to, and like the results came in, and they were like putting them up on a projector and saying like, well this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, and somebody finally stood up and just said like, I don't care about anything except this one, and everybody else in the room was kind of like, yeah, we kind of care about that too. Like collaborative document editing was the thing. And the metaphor he uses is like, Earth is by far the most habitable planet in the solar system, and the others aren't even close. So like the thing you work on is the most important thing, and like all the other things are not important. So like one of the things we were really able to do was focus super tightly and just say no to a lot of things early on.
Okay. So my next question was going to be, and that's sort of related, but your biggest lesson, you know, in selling SaaS. Or selling Slack, from your time, to date. I guess focus could be one of those lessons. But have you another sort of example of what you've learned, selling, not selling, Slack?
I mean, the nature of SaaS is like you make almost all the money after you actually do all the hard work, right? And so you have to do the hard work in a way that sets your customer up so that they get all the value later on as well. So for us, I think like just aligning interests as much as possible was key. So we tried to do that just in the way that we talked about customers and the way that we worked with customers, and we tried to build like what we now call customer success, and there's a whole industry around just into like helping people get the product. And we would do everything from invite us into your Slack team account, and we'll actually help set it up, and we'll help like train you on things, and we'll do office hours. We did office hours. That was always fun. I'll be live in your Slack team account from noon till 1 today. So just tactically, we did all kinds of stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, the hesitation I've got is like that worked for us, and that worked for the time that we were going to market. That worked for the customers we had, and that worked for the product that we had. And the thing about like transposing those ideas onto other products, other markets, and other times is it's not the same.
Yeah, what works for you doesn't necessarily work for the next person. Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about marketing. What about Slack? What do you do, in terms of content creation? And are there any particular types of content sort of creation, content marketing that work particularly sort of well for you guys, and why?
We didn't do any content marketing until, let me think, maybe a year after we launched. But I think that kind of like official content marketing where you did like blog posts, and now we have a podcast, and now we have like a blog post that goes out like every day or every second day. Like it's amazing. And they're cool. They're great. we actually kind of tried to bake as much content into the product as possible, so you didn't have to do content marketing or something like that. You just tried the product. And so again, focusing people onto like the thing that they had to do, their job, was successful for us. So like baking like user training into the onboarding, trying as much as possible like to overcome the cold start problem. So like a product is intimidating the first time you use it, and like typing a message or clicking a button or something like that, does it work? Does it not work? Anything like that. So the more you can like just break that down, and people are interested in themselves. So like we used like profile creation as like this Slack bot interaction to get people to like send a message, and then they were like, oh, I'm sending messages. Oh, okay, I'm sending messages. To just like demystify that. And then there were lots of fun things that we tried to bake in as well. So like the context of our market was like enterprise software was, it was like as exciting as watching paint dry. And so we tried to take a different approach, both in terms of brand, in terms of colors, in terms of tone and voice. And then, there's Easter eggs in the product too. And I think part of that came from like being a game development company in the beginning. You kind of realized like, there's no substitute for motivation for fun, right? Like fun is incredibly motivating. So if you can make things, fun for people, I think it's really valuable. And it gets over a lot of the like grumpy pants kind of, this is one more new, like, and I'm like that too, right? Like somebody says, well, we're gonna use this for, this thing now. And I'm like, get off my porch. So it's just like, I'm trying to work as hard as I can just to do the things that I'm doing, right? Like now I have to learn something new.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's it's certainly a fun product, and lots of SaaS products actually that I've used. They have that kind of fun element, and one of the great things that SaaS as software is sort of today is taken on board. But what about transparency? A lot of SaaS companies use transparency as sort of company ethos. Which is kind of tied into marketing,
like as an internal value statement, like buffer.
Right. They publish, or they're extremely sort of extreme transparency.
Yep.
Publish everybody's salaries. What do you guys? What's your view on transparency? What do you do on transparency, and is it tied into marketing? Is it a marketing strategy, or just a company ethos?
I think we want to always be bringing all the things that we do, marketing, sales, anything we do, back to sort of our core mission, which is to make your working life simpler, more pleasant, and more productive. And so I don't personally see how like publishing the salaries of Slack employees would help with that mission. And people have such low bandwidth for anything anyways, like just focus on doing that one thing, which is I think a pretty modest goal, but kind of never ending, is hard enough. So we just focus on that. If it works for other companies, it seems more to me like actually like a recruitment tool for self-selection into the application process. So our 6 core values are not, transparency is not one of them. And I think transparency means different things to different people, and for some people it's threatening, for some people it's not. So that's not one of them. We chose things like courtesy, empathy, playfulness, thriving,
Testing yourself.
Solidarity.
You didn't have to do that.
It's okay.
Okay. And what about, I know your CMO, Bill Masitis, pronounced
Well done.
correctly. He's a big fan of customer centricity, as the company, and NPS, Net Promoter Score. How and when does Slack use NPS, and what has been the results, in your sort of marketing? How have you been able to measure that?
Well, we use NPS internally as one of our key performance indicators, and we see it as a great tool to be able to, as it says on the box, see whether people are recommending Slack or not. And so we then do segmentation across that to say, like, are there problems in administrators of small teams, for example, or something like that, right? So I think it gives you a really strong barometer on where you are, and like recommendations is always going to be the best source of new customers, I think, for every product. And so, if somebody comes to SaaS Talk and they're like, dudes, you've got to come to SaaS Talk next year, to all their friends, that is incredibly powerful, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're actually handing out sort of, cards, placards that will be saying, the same thing, dudes, you've got to come to SaaStock. So everyone gets one in their goodie bag. Thanks for ruining the surprise. But yeah, I mean, in SaaS, certainly I'm reading a lot about it. Sort of, word of mouth, seems to be this almost kind of goal that, I mean, it makes sense, right? But SaaS companies are striving for word of mouth and using word of mouth to, sell their products. And so we need to have a great product so people keep using it. Selling it, probably easier said than done, but it's working.
I mean, like if you think about how did you discover the last great restaurant you went to, right? Probably through somebody saying we went to this great restaurant and I had this dish and it was amazing or something, right? So I don't think it's unique to SaaS, and I think it's a terrific. I mean, if you can make customers successful like that, then you have a successful business. If you can't, then it's problematic, and you have to generate new customers all the time, right? Yeah,
no, absolutely. So two more questions from me before we throw it out there. So I'm giving you a 5-minute warning to think of some good questions for James. So I don't know if this is a fun one, but can we take a peek inside Slack sales and marketing tech stack? What tools are you using? For sales, not sales, and
it's not that sexy, I got to tell you.
And marketing.
I mean, we use a bunch of tools. We have this stat now that we often use with customers, which is most enterprises now have over 600 tools that they use. And in a way, Slack is kind of the problem, or the solution to that problem, which is it pulls everything together in one place, but it still means that your marketing team probably has a dozen tools that they use, and your sales team probably has 20 tools. So, I mean, we use Salesforce as a CRM, same as, a ton of other companies. We use Google Analytics in the back end for the website. We don't have anything for marketing automation or anything like that, just because emailing people about Slack seems counterintuitive. Mm-hmm. But we use a ton of other things too. We've started doing a lot more TV advertising, so there's all kinds of metrics tracking that you can do for brand awareness, down to conversion tracking. To be honest with you, I haven't kept track of all the tools on the marketing side of things. We use a data enrichment platform called Clearbit, and then we use just a ton of standard kind of tooling Google Docs and Gmail, and we use a pretty cool Gmail plugin called Groove. If anybody's in sales or account management, which is pretty great for Salesforce. It makes sure that all the interactions you have with customers are then logged against their Salesforce account or opportunity, or both. So those are pretty great. But I think in lots of ways, it's interesting. We don't use a lot of cutting edge tools in that, just because I think we're a little risk averse when it comes to core tooling.
Okay. Well, there's a good list there. I mean, so enterprises probably use 600 or so tools, so difficult to know what they all are, and certainly list all of them. From a small business perspective, I use probably myself, I don't know, 20, 30, and I couldn't name them. Name the top ones, but
we use Zendesk is a big part of our tooling. Just because so much of our interaction, if our account management team works with for every time we work with a customer, the customer experience team works with 50 customers, just because they handle the majority of customer inquiries, which are about how do I do this thing, or why doesn't it do this, or something like that.
Okay. Final question, end on a big one. What one piece of advice would you give to the audience on optimizing sales and marketing for Slack-like growth?
I don't think you want to achieve Slack-like growth. You want to achieve the growth that's appropriate for the stage that you're at, the market you're in, and the timing that you're at. So we got super lucky about a ton of things too, right? And Stuart's sort of on record saying it's just luck, which is great. So I actually think Slack's an anomaly. And so I think a lot of the things that we were able to do are just best practices, and we were in the right place at the right time. And the team was super good, and also was a much more mature team than I had ever worked with before. And as a result, the quality of people was just, if you had 10 options to solve a problem, they'd already been down 8 of them and been those are dead ends. Here's the 2 that are opportunities, and here's the one that I recommend. So just like, I mean, good decisions come from experience, and experience comes from bad decisions. So oftentimes, like, we've tried to cultivate sort of less of a sort of traditional, like, Red Bull fueled startup kind of feel, and like lots of our staff are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, have kids, and so we're just like work hard, go home, and try and keep sane hours. But as a result, it's just the way that we do it is to be able to take advantage of the experience, I think.
Okay, good. So those are my questions. I guess now throw it out to the audience for a bit of Q&A. Hopefully you've got some questions for James. Who wants to go first? Anybody? Oh, let's go with the lady at the front.
Ladies first.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you've got 77 of the top, was the Fortune 100s, but obviously smaller teams looking to land and expand. What are some tactics that you guys are using, some actionable things that you guys are doing that is helping those grow to much larger teams, organizations, whatever?
So the question is, should I repeat the question?
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
I'll repeat. That's okay. I'll repeat the question. What are the tactics, or what are some specific tactics that you're using to expand within those enterprise customers?
Right.
From 500 users to 5,000 to 50,000.
Yeah.
I'll suggest. So the nature of Slack as a product is that there's sort of a general growth that happens over time if it's a successful product, because if the product management team is using it, then they're interfacing with the engineering team all the time. And the engineering team are like, well, what's this thing that you're using here? Oh yeah, it's Slack, get on it, right? Like, and then the engineering team is using it, and then if the engineering team's using it, then the design team want to use it. So there's this natural kind of growth that we see just because of the nature of the product that it is. That said, that's a lot more challenging in large organizations, because large organizations understand that they're going to be on the hook for paying for that at some point. And so they have like constraints around that. So some of the classic constraints are like security compliance, legal compliance, regulatory compliance, so stuff like that. So we just try at an early stage at taking control of the engagement with the customer and saying, like, here are the steps that you're going to have to go through, even if you as like the department manager don't recognize them yet. Here's the steps that you're going to have to go through in order to make this successful in the long term. And so we've got some pretty good experience now in helping guide them through that process, and we sort of initiate it and go to like some of those hard conversations. I think particularly for like some SaaS companies, those would be conversations that you want to avoid, because you want to build your adoption as much as possible. And so we try and like tackle them early on, and then we have sort of structured processes that we plug customers into that they want. Oftentimes they'll have existing structured processes for evaluating software, whether it's proof of concept or pilot or all the other kind of stuff like security and legal and pricing and provisioning and that kind of stuff. So we try and define what that is, and then just work through like the many small yeses kind of methodology, which is like, if you have 500 people using the product, how do you make them as successful as you can? Build that story into like something material to then say, let's make that more successful for you at 5,000 users. Let's make that more successful for you at 20,000 users. And always trying to come back to like, who are your key people within the customer, and how do you make them the hero of the story? Like, how do you motivate them and continue to keep them rewarded from advocating for the product? And
that person thinking about that is the same account manager the entire way.
Yeah, we use an account executive with enterprise customers, so it's just a different title and a bit of a different profile. And then they're supported by 2 additional roles: a solution engineer who handles a lot of technical stuff, single sign-on, security, that kind of stuff. And then now a lot more like around platform development, app development, and custom integrations. And then the second role is a customer success role, which is really around adoption, training, change management, communications to users, that kind of stuff.
Cool. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yep.
I think you guys did something really cool with MetaLab, especially at the beginning. I think it was 2013, early 2014.
Yep.
So how would that be a strategy that you would recommend to startups to kind of outsource part of the design and the mechanics of early releases of the product?
So the question is, would you recommend for other startups to outsource the design and product design at early stages?
MetaLab, because I think that was kind of the kind of poster child of, let's outsource the design of early releases
Yeah.
and the mechanics and a lot of things that doing internally would require to hire a lot of people from the very beginning, and you might not want to do that at the very start.
I think if you can get the outcome that you're seeking, it can work for you, and that's what we were specifically looking for. It would have taken, it was a time problem, so it would have taken 2, 3, 4 months to hire a design team of the quality of that versus plugging into a team that you could get running in 3 weeks. And so that was really where we needed to be in terms of in market, in time. And we had a very tight scope for the MetaLab team and very specific deliverables. And I think if you have that, then you can continue. But if you outsource a lot of the thinking around the product, a lot of the onboarding, a lot of the user mechanics and user rewards, I don't think it's setting you up, because you as the founder or the founding team don't learn the lessons in the hard way from customers directly. So I think if you can constrain the scope and define it really well, it can work for you, or it worked for us. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi. You mentioned you have 800,000 paying subscribers to the platform. How many, I suppose, onboarding subscribers do you have before they become upgraded? Or do you have that model?
Yeah, so so you come to slack.com and you sign up for an account. And then we measure that. We measure traffic, signups, and then we really measure like a couple of key activation points. So we figured out like how many people have to join a team account in order for it to be considered active. How many messages do they have to send to be an active user? And then we measure daily active users. So we have 2.7 million daily active users, and then 800,000 of those are paid. Does that answer your question?
Yes, plenty.
Yeah. So, and the growth in that is, last year was about 3.5 times.
Right.
So, and this year we're on about the same run rate.
Yeah, so I was upgrading my new Slack app yesterday on my phone, and you know, on each new upgrade that you have, is whether you're using Gmail or Tinder or Snapchat, right? There's always a what's new button, right?
Yep.
And 3 out of the 4 had just bug fixes for it, right? And so there was, when I opened Slack, the what's new was nearly half a page long. Kind of fun, interesting to read, rather than just bug fixes. So obviously that relates to your company culture. How do you sustain that as you grow from 300 to 500 to 1,000, from the interview process all the way to having people actually write a paragraph long? Kind of, so it's a long-winded question, but culture as you guys grow.
Yeah, so I think the question is, how do you maintain a culture as exemplified by, sort of a creative approach to bug fixes as you continue to grow, from a few hundred to thousands and more, right? Yeah. It's a good problem. I don't mean to be like glib about it. It's a super hard thing to do. And so one of the challenges of growth is that if I hired you tomorrow, the job you would start doing in a month, because you have to give a month's notice, would be slightly different than the job you were probably hired when you were hired. And then 6 months later, it would probably be a different job again. And so we try and do some skills and experience matching, but we actually hire a lot more for like traits and values than we do for skills and experience. You have to have good skills and experience as well, but when it comes down to it, we look for more sort of culture match or values match. And if you look at a lot of the psychology research, that actually creates more success at the team level and at the organization level as well, which is the organization is just the sum of a bunch of teams, right? So I'd suggest thinking really hard about the traits that you're looking for, and then matching those to your values overall, and actually building a scorecard of candidates and evaluating people on that. And then figuring out, the other thing we do is we try and move to work product as soon as possible. So when we evaluate candidates, we don't the person doing so recruiters often source candidates or do an initial pass, and then actually the hiring manager or a teammate of the person, if they're successful, do a pass on work product. And so for engineers, it's like a coding test. For actually account managers, it's like a writing test. So we give you 3 actual inquiries from customers, and you respond to them in 2 ways. So you actually play the role of the account manager, and then you, in 100 words or less, sort of unpack what you're doing in that. and we score that without looking at your resume. So we try and do that because it cuts out a lot of cognitive biases around what you, like how people shortcut decisions, right? Do they go to places, did they go to schools that I know? Do they work at places that I know? Do they have big titles that are, directly adjacent to the one that I want to move them in, stuff like that, right? So I think that's a long-winded way of saying, like, be really purposeful about all the small things, and nothing is too small to, like, do well. So one of our values, the sixth one that I hadn't said, was craftsmanship. Does that answer your question?
Maybe just a little bit slightly different theme. Niamh mentioned that we are all in Dublin, and there was a reason why we selected Dublin. And you mentioned that you moved to a new office recently. Maybe we are looking for a new office, and we hope to move to a new office soon. Any lesson learned that you would kind of happy to share, like what to look for, what to do, what not to do, and any kind of piece of advice when you grew up from the 30 people to the next stage?
So any guidance on finding a new office in Dublin?
And do's and don'ts.
That's the next SaaS meetup. No.
Yeah, it's super challenging. I don't mean to totally duck the question, but actually, like, our facilities manager is right there.
Thanks, James.
Yeah. And if you wanted more specifics, he would be much more of an expert than I would.
His name and his email address.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is he up for hire? No.
He's very well valued at Slack. It's super challenging. I mean, you can't start early enough, and you can't think long term enough, I think, right? And then you just have to figure out, like, in terms of your resources, time, money, and people, like, what do you have to spend more and less, and make decisions based on that.
Just maybe one funny thing to ask. How long is your lease?
I don't actually know.
I'll answer that after.
Yeah. So it's not 10 years.
It's not?
No.
15?
It's shorter than 10 years.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
No problem.
I knew it is hard.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's hard. And, like, we've recently been looking at office space in London as well. It's super hard there. So it's hard everywhere that, great talented people are, is the reality. So.
Just going back to the to your start, you said you're working with about 8 to 12 different companies. During that time, you were developing a pricing model. How did you come to that pricing model, and how important is that in your sales and marketing?
When we were working with, like, 8 to 12, we didn't have a pricing model. We just told them, like, you're going to have to pay for it someday, but, like, not today. And we didn't have a pricing model actually until, so we did what we called a preview release on August 12th, 2013, where we had essentially put up a website and did some PR, and 8,000 companies signed up in the first 24 hours, and 16,000 did by the end of that week and stuff. So we had a pretty good, like, group of people who we had to invite into the product, and we did that over the next 6 months, really kind of slowly, like 50 a week. I think some weeks were like 10 or something like that, like early on, and then we did it a lot more programmatically as we started to work out some of the kinks of the onboarding. But we didn't actually release pricing until February 12th, so pretty much 6 months later.
And then how did you come up with the numbers?
Good question. How did we come up with the numbers? We looked at a whiteboard. We put numbers on it. We looked at, like, monthly and annual options. We did some reading on perception of pricing. We looked at what other people were charging in the marketplace. We thought about where we wanted to be positioning-wise. I mean, positioning is a big part of it. And came up with $8 per user per month for the standard plan, and $80 per user per year on the annual standard plan. And that seemed to work. But you can test it, like, with your early people and just say, like, here's the price. Let's work on that, right? It's never too early. Like, one of the great sayings that I love is, like, it's never too early to talk about money, and those who don't talk about money don't make a lot of it. So just, like, if people are getting value out of it, it's totally a fair thing. And you have to quantify that, and you have to make it for them and stuff like that, but yeah. Is that helpful?
Yeah, very helpful, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the audience for Slack is pretty diverse, as in the appeal is quite broad. do you go for like target personas if you're going after? How do you prioritize your marketing spend? There's a particular audiences where you have a sweet spot, or is that why you're kind of going generic with TV advertising because it's very broad?
Do you know, so your question was how do you target people as Slack customers, because the audience could be very broad, right? Yeah. Do you know the metaphor of like the air war and ground war?
Yes, what it means, yeah.
Yeah. So like when you're going to market, you want to fight both an air war and a ground war. And the air war is like brand advertising, TV, PR, key, market perception, that kind of stuff. Lighthouse customers. And then the ground war is like your website, your collateral, the scripts for people, like that kind of stuff. So you have to, I think, do both of them at the same time. And for us, in terms of the air war, it's very broad. We started out largely focused, I think, on probably the tech press and technologists, because they were the ones we were comfortable with, who we could see the product succeeding with. And that was a large enough market to get us to sort of the next stage. I mean, we've got distinct markets where we've got better traction than in other markets, technology, media, government. We've got more challenging markets like healthcare or banking, but we're starting to make good traction there too. And I think just as you kind of learn that, you can kind of move around it. But we're almost 3 years into the product now before we're doing like some of the broad-based stuff. So like, I think you can postpone that a long time. And just figure out like what is the decision-making process of the people you need to speak to, and how do you reach them. I know that's a super generic answer, but like it's kind of the answer. Sorry.
Just going back to the early days of joining Slack, I guess you're the company that shrunk back from 50 to 8, so it's probably in a workload mode at that stage. And you're probably 42 people looking at it, the next hire, and saying they got to be pretty good. How did you sell yourself to Slack to get hired?
So your question is, how did you sell yourself to Slack to get hired? I had a weird sort of onboarding experience that was totally not typical. I met with Stuart once. We'd been introduced by a mutual friend. We knew each other because I had organized a couple of conferences and he'd spoken at one of them. And they'd never had somebody doing marketing before, and they realized like that was one of the problems that was in the preceding business, I think. And so they needed some expertise around that. And I just said, like, for the first 3 months I was a consultant and that's what I was going to do. And my wife was saying to me, like, you have this full-time offer from this big company here. Like, what are you doing with these? Anyways. So I had to sell it internally a little bit, in the family, that is. Yeah, it worked out so far, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, hindsight is 20/20, right? It could have just as easily have not been anything. But the thing that I realized, I think, is that the quality of people that I was working with at Slack was inimitable. And as a result, the quality of experience that I could learn from there. And I'm always somebody like, I just want to be learning as much as I can. And I was going to learn way more doing that than doing another, previously I'd been like a VP of marketing for like software companies and stuff. And I could do that again. And like, that would be, maybe I'd learn like, 10% or 15% more than I sort of brought into it. Versus, getting like 50%, 60% more. So I'd never done a sales role before being there, and now like I lead the sales and account management team here. So it's been totally different for me, and it was a risk, and I just went for the learning. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Just a quick question. How do you set your criteria for your free tier and your paid tier? So I mean, being freemium is really great because you get recommended so much, so people get on board really quickly if it's free. But where do you set this? Set the border saying, well, now you have to pay, and how 10,000 messages or whatever.
So the question is, how did you set the thresholds on the free plan, really, right?
Exactly.
Well, we wanted to make sure that the product experience wasn't bad, even if you stayed on free for a long time. Because I think a bad product experience damages the perception of the product in a meaningful way for a long term. And like nobody recommends a product that stinks, even if they're not paying for it. Like word of mouth is super powerful, especially like in that kind of product and at that stage. So we didn't want to cripple the product. We wanted it to continue to be usable for people. And we also realized that like people were going to use it in not exactly ideal use cases. They might use it for like, their bridge club or something like that, right? Like those people are never going to pay. So, but we still wanted them to be able to use it because there's value in just like the reach in having them using it. So we set 10,000 messages limit, and then when you paid, you actually got all that back, so you don't lose them after 10,000 messages or something like that. So there's, it's just like, don't make your product into a dick, really, right? Like it would be terrible if like it started eating your messages or something like that. But also make it big enough so that one of the key upgrade features, search, worked for 10,000 messages. Like it's a reasonably large corpus. We also limited it to 5 integrations with external services at the beginning. We actually increased that to 10 now. And we found that didn't really change conversion rates a lot. Like most people are upgrading. Most people are actually upgrading because they want to upgrade. Like it's 10,000 messages, yes, but it's sort of cumulative of like all the different features. Plus there's some binary on-off features that are only available on the paid plans.
And where did 10,000 was that on the whiteboard, or how did you come up with it?
Yeah, it's on the whiteboard. You have to come up with something, right? So.
My question is, how does mobile fit in with the whole product? Would you say it's predominantly a desktop or tablet-based product, or how does, do most people use it that way, or how do you find the amount of people who use it on mobile?
So the question is,
challenges around mobile as well.
yeah. So the question is, how does Slack use, or how do Slack users use Slack by device, and are there specific challenges around mobile? Yeah.
Exactly.
So the average Slack user is logged in 10 hours a day and active in the product for over 2 hours. So it's actually an incredibly it's a much higher engagement rate than like Facebook or something like that, right? Because people use it all day. And if you think about the types of jobs, like if you walk through an office and there's Slack users, a lot of them have like 2 monitors on their screen. And one of them is Slack, and the other one is like the thing they do. So if they're in finance, it's a spreadsheet. If they're, a designer, it's Photoshop. If they're, a coder, it's an IDE or something like that. So I think like 80, I don't know what the numbers are, but like most of the usage is on desktop. But mobile becomes like the remote control that is like the key thing that keeps people in touch, whether they're in meetings, whether they're at home, whether they're on the road, whether they're going to the office or anything like that. So like mobile, like hours wise, isn't a high proportion of the hours people spend, but I think engagement wise, it's a high proportion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and there's challenges around shrinking something that's really predominantly on desktop down to a mobile, that you still have a good user experience.
Yeah, the original.
Do you think it's there now, or do you think you see it evolving over time?
Yeah, the original. Have you used it?
In the mobile?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So the original Slack mobile app was like an HTML5 client that we just wrapped for iOS and then for Android. And we had to move away from that to get more advanced and more sophisticated. And so now we support iOS, Android, Windows Phone. I think that's it. And we just found like the level of engagement, particularly inside organizations, whether there was like a BYOD or bring your own device policy, or if it was like a mobile device management, like the company was providing the devices. We had to be able to support those natively on all the platforms. And it's a separate design team, experience team, coding team for each platform. So Slack tends to be the same on all platforms. And so some of the core features like messaging and read state sync, so that like when you read something on this device, it's read on this device, and like here's your unread line and stuff like that. Notifications, like some of the core product features are the same, but like some of them work differently across devices too. No problem. Go ahead.
What's different selling into EMEA, I guess, from those versus North America?
Yeah, so the question is, have you noticed much difference selling into EMEA versus North America? Yes, definitely. I mean, I think the great, the supposition people bring to global expansion, I think, from an American context is that, oh, we went to market in the US or in the Americas, and that's a market of 350 million people, and it's the largest in the world, and so like we achieved this scale, and so like we're getting traction, right? And then you go to Europe, for example, and it's a market of 500 million people, and you think, well, shit, that's even bigger, like we're gonna hit that hard, right? But like what you don't realize is it's actually 32 markets. And like Germany is very different than France, is very different than Italy, is very different than Greece or something else, right? So the complexity has been, I think, a good challenge for us because we also have an Asia Pacific office now, and so the EMEA market in Dublin here was our first international office. International sort of looking office. We had a Vancouver and a San Francisco office prior to that. And it just, I think, made us level up our game in terms of how we went to market with a lot more nuance and understanding. But that said, we're still not very sophisticated about it. Like, we're still just English only, both in terms of product, in terms of customer support, in terms of sales, in terms of collateral, everything like that. So we've got a long way to go.
Do you use account-based marketing much in Slack? And if so, what kind of campaigns or content and platforms do you use?
Do you use account-based? Maybe tell me what you mean by account-based marketing.
Like, so just targeting named accounts
So with advertising?
with advertising, or just through sales and marketing with Salesforce, and you don't use Marketo, but yeah, well, mainly through advertising.
So we haven't done any account-based advertising yet, or we haven't done any account-based sort of cold calls or outreach or anything like that today. And the approach, I think, the way that I think about it is, if you think about like a bullseye and its concentric rings, the center is like people coming to you and saying like, we want to buy. Next out from there are like people using your product and like maybe you have to nudge them to buy, or they want to talk about negotiating pricing or something like that. And then out from there, it becomes sort of lower and lower probability. And that's just a ring outside of where we've got to at this stage. We may get there at some stage, but we haven't got there yet.
How do you ensure that Slack stays a cool company despite growing, or in favor of growing, but still keeping your numbers?
So how do you make sure Slack stays a cool company?
It's mainly focusing on how you keep the OKRs, or set the OKRs, and managing performance of people, again, in different offices.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be a day when Slack is no longer the prettiest girl at the party, and I think that that's okay. I think that we want to build something durable for many, many years to come. And I don't think it's about being cool. I think it's about being relevant and about being a tangible driver of business value. I know that sounds like business speak and stuff like that, but like at the end of the day, like you've got to like prove the value of it. And it's really cool to have 800,000 paying customers. It's really cooler to have 80 million paying customers and to achieve like the promise I think that we see. Does that answer your question? Sorry, I kind of dodged it, but like, I don't think it's important to be cool, to be honest with you.
One more question, just with your user base and the freemium model, were you ever tempted to push ads at them?
So the question is, with the freemium model, were we ever tempted to push ads at them? No, and I would be really surprised if we ever did. I think it fundamentally misunderstands business-to-business software versus business-to-consumer software. And if you start advertising that essentially you're selling your users and you're just collecting data on them, and that's not the business we're in. Our users own their data, and if they want to export it or delete it or anything like that, that's up to them. We don't mine it. It's hard enough to be in one business.
Yeah,
I think that's a wrap.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.